You said something a while ago. You said you were teaching blind people how to cook. What was
Yeah.
that about?
So every state has this program. It happened, there was something in the 70s called the Randall Shepard Act, and it was a federal thing that happened. And what that was is it gave money to each state to keep blind people off disability. And in this case, they developed this program called Business Enterprise. So if you're blind, you're going to get a counselor from the state, usually, is this process. And as you go through this, they'll teach you how to use a blind cane. If you need a seeing eye dog, they'll get you hooked up with a seeing eye dog. If you need to learn how to use a computer, they'll help you learn how to use a computer. And they help you with all these different skills. And at the end of it, it's somewhere along this way, you can choose to join this program called Business Enterprise. And what that means is you're going to go through this training process and get licensed as a vendor, and you're going to operate a food service facility. So you go through the training process, and then you get a food service facility. And these places really ranged. One person had essentially like a sandwich, cafe, like hot special breakfast kind of place that was about paced out to do about 3 million a year in sales. So some of these operations are really big. Some of these operations will maybe do $200,000 in sales, but only require the blind vendor, just that one person to do it. And so the jobs that it would take to be successful for these vendors really varied across the board. Some people would need to be able to operate everything, be able to make a latte, and the vision of the person always varied. So that was a really interesting thing to me. So they were legally blind, but maybe some person could see a pinhole, but they could see 20/20 through this pinhole, but all they could see is right here. Or maybe everything was
Wow.
blurry for some people. Yeah, one guy, nobody realized he was ever blind because he could see your object of your person. So he could walk around you and work around you, but he couldn't make out your face. But he could make out your like your
Yeah.
body, you were, and all these other characteristics about you. Or we had one lady and she was totally blind. She is she was such a great person to work with. Her name was Gloria. If you ever hear this, Gloria, and we'd always I end up going to this place to help her close it. It was Tacoma, and Tacoma is a power place. And this other guy there is working with her. His name's Trey, and they have a great relationship. And he's joking around, and he goes over to me. He goes, "We call her Hears Whispers from Afar." And this is in a loud kitchen, and if you've ever been in a kitchen, there's noise and there's everything. And she's probably 75 feet away in this loud kitchen. And she goes, "That's right." And just screams it. And I'm just sitting there and I'm like, that was incredible because he just whispered this to me literally.
Yeah.
It hears whispers from afar. It's true. And so it was really interesting that, like, even though their vision, maybe it was compromised to some degree. Maybe they were able to see some part of it. Like, different things adapted and different things changed for people. And one of the guys that I worked with that I just it really amazed me. He was comfortable using a knife before he was blind. He had worked in food service, and
Okay.
so he was very spatially aware of his hands. I think he also did martial arts. And so he was spatially aware of himself very well. And so this was, I think, around like 2014. Snapchat is blowing up and everything. And
Hmm.
I'd be like, he was really good at taking a task that needed to be repeated many times and doing that. So, for instance, I'd say, we need to slice 30 pounds of cheese today. And so I could get all the blocks onto a cart over there for him. He could go, he could slice all of them because he didn't have to go look for many things. Things were there. He could do the task. He could move on to the next part of the task. And that's really the workflow that he needed. But it it would always amaze me because I'm sitting over here and here's this guy who has no eyes and just going to town with the slicer. I mean, like, he is going fast too. Zoom, 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 zoom. And it's like you have people who can easily see this and are just like not a part of, like not down. And
Is this
Randy
like a
is
deli slicer, or is he got like a big knife and he's doing it? Or is this like a
both.
machine that he's
In that instance, he was using the deli slicer, but he would take, I would take like a 25-pound bag of carrots and onions and stuff. And he would just cut all of them and he would just go through. And one of the guys in the program had designed this cutting board for blind people where it raised it up off of the counter. Most cutting
okay?
boards that you see are flat on the counter, and his had raised it up so you could put containers to the side of it. So you could just scoop the stuff off as soon as you're done. It was a great idea. So you just see him, he just cut all the onions. And I always remember, it's like, Randy, are you crying from these onions? Just always making a joke or something about it. And he
That's
found a lot of,
terrible.
no, his thing was he enjoyed the humor of it. And it
Yeah.
was uncomfortable for me at first because he would make jokes about himself being blind. He's like I'd be like, oh yeah, Randy, it's right over there. And I built this inventory system for him as a blind person that he could find anything in the restaurant based off of like different tactile codes. Like maybe there was a bump here or a lack of a bump here, and then he had these these little patches that he could put on stuff, and he could record onto it with a pin friend. So I could say, this is a box of tinfoil. And so he could find the little tactile thing and figure out what everything was. But he'd always be making jokes. He's like, oh yeah, I see that over there, and just making jokes about it. And it took a long time. It was kind of uncomfortable at first, but then I realized, like, also in this specific situation, as a person who's teaching and a person who's building, part of my job in that sense was to make him feel accepted as part of the team. And
Right.
so part of that was like getting to the point to making jokes about this because he wanted to feel normal. And it wasn't about making him as fun of him as a person or as a character or a personal attack on him. It's making fun of the irony in the situation as well too. But yeah, he was absolutely, he could cut stuff with a knife. He could use a deli slicer. There's certain things that we didn't do because it's like for instance, like you cook pasta and you don't have a depth perception for how where your hand is going into the hot liquid or frying things. But he could make sandwiches. He could cook everything. We we were teaching him how to make a latte,
Okay.
and one of the things that Gloria, the person that taught me, is when you steam the milk, you put the pitcher in the bottom of your hand, and as soon as it feels like somebody has that tiny little skin and pinches it really hard, that's just the right temperature to be able to know that your milk is hot enough for your latte. And so they have this little tool and it has these little prongs on it, and it sits on the cup. And the two prongs, so after you have this hot liquid, you're going to pour it into the cup, and the liquid's going to come up. And as soon as the liquid touches where these two prongs are, it makes this like fire escape noise at you. And it's just super loud. And so you can now, being blind, you can make a latte and no depth perception for liquids and hot liquids as well too. So it was a really interesting job, and it really took not only like any basic thing that you thought about doing in a restaurant or working with it, and it added levels of complexity to it. But if you were able to work through and break down these levels of complexity, you could really teach anybody how to do anything. And it also taught me too that there was no task that I would not give somebody because they were blind outside of obvious safety reasons, like using a fryer or something like that. And especially if they express, I'm not comfortable with this. But
Right.
some, sometimes like we see people and it's like, oh, they need help crossing the road or something like that. And the reality is they usually don't need help with anything. Like they're good, they're chilling, they're doing their thing. And some of the skills that they do, they still do better than you. Like just because they're blind, it didn't correlate. There was no correlation between being blind and being able to do a task per se. Some with to some degree, like there's times like with design or things like that, you obviously like do your best with or like and people could use different amounts of vision, I think is part of why I say that as well too. Some people could see when I make stuff. They'd be like, "Oh, that looks good." You know, maybe one of their eyes was totally compromised, and one of their eyes was like at a 400 and a 20, something like that. So it's always
Man,
so interesting.
that had to have been really meaningful to you, like what was that like? Did you feel good about helping people when you were working there? Like was it fulfilling doing that?
Um, I mean, honestly, I just don't really think of blind people any differently. Like
That's so cool,
maybe there
man.
was a point where it was like, oh yeah, I feel better because I'm helping blind people or things like that. Like it's a cool topic to bring up and it's a cool conversation starter, but it's like to me, it there really isn't any difference, and I didn't really ever treat it any differently as well too. Like if I had an expectation for a sighted person, I had the same expectation if it was a blind person as well too. But I was more
Wow.
compassionate on the time situations, right? Like, yeah, if I need a latte made, you still have to make the latte or be able to have to make the latte. Like there is no option there. So like if you need more time to make the latte to be successful in that, or if we need other tools to be able to make that work, we'll look at what that takes to make that happen. But you still have to do everything that everybody else does. You're a participating member of this group as well too. And
Okay,
so
and what again was this? Was this like a group for what was the purpose? I mean, was this an actual business being run, or was it more of like something put together to help a group of blind people that wanted to be involved in doing activities?
sure. So every state essentially has a Department of Transportation, Secretary of State, all these different parts of the state. This department is called Services for the Blind. And in some fashion or another, this exists in every state. And in Services for the Blind, there's this program called Business Enterprise or some variation of Business Enterprise. And what that does is if you have a government building, it gives the priority on the bidding for the contracts for any sort of food or vending in it to this community. So they can go through and they can bid on these facilities to try and keep blind people off of disabilities and creating jobs. And so,
So maybe they're working in an actual cafe where like regular customers come in and they might order a latte, and then
mhm.
there's probably somebody like that's not blind that works there that's sort of assisting, but then there are also blind workers working. Is that kind of the setup, or?
The blind person is usually the owner. And
Oh,
so,
wow.
yeah, they're the person that owns the business. And so when you own a business, you have to wear so many different hats. And sometimes that means you have to be able to make a latte, or you have to be able to make a sandwich, or you have to be able to do this. And so, very rarely were they the person that was fundamentally doing that because they were also responsible for applying for business licenses, paying their taxes, ordering food from vendors, all of the things that came along with that. And I didn't work actually for the state. I was a contractor. So I had this business. It was called Sharma Solutions at the time, and it was an enterprising solutions based off of this specifically. So if you are blind and you had a food service facility, I would help with any aspect of it. I helped a lot with point of sale systems. I helped a lot with one guy. I built an inventory system for a total inventory system, so he could know where anything in the restaurant was and could take account of it because you have to be able to account how much money you have invested in your restaurant. You have to know how much cash is on the shelves. Maybe another person, I taught him how to make a latte. Somebody else, we did a website solution. Somebody else, we got coffee sleeves printed for them. You name it. If it involved food service in a business and they had to do it, I helped them with it and helped teach them it.
That's pretty impressive. How old were you when you started this business?
I was 23, 23, I believe, at the time. So my
That
mom
means
used to be an accountant for them as on the
okay.
state level, and they had a contract come up. It was for the FAA up in Seattle, Washington, Shout out to anybody who ever listens to this. And so they they asked me. They said, "Hey, we have this person who is going to be taking over this facility, but we want to be able to hold the contract for a year. Do you think that you could open up a business license, hold this contract to operate this place for a year, and then turn it over to him after the year? So over this year, we'll help you out a little bit with making sure that this place is geared towards this vendor." And absolutely. Who wouldn't want to be handed a restaurant where it's all furnished with the equipment? It's inside of
Right.
the FAA. Like, all the people that work at the FAA are the highest paid branch of the federal government as well too. So you're talking about engineers. The FAA is, they regulate all of the flight. It's so, and it's done really well. Sure, there may be hiccups sometimes along the way, but it's a very efficient federal agency. And so, like, you're dealing with, it was a great opportunity. I'm a science person. Like, I love going there, and I just talk to all these people about just life and their jobs, and as I'm serving these people. And I ended up being doing pretty well with it over the short time that I was there. So I was there, I think, for about 11 months. The place grew about 400 to 500%. So the building was very responsive, and the people were very responsive to whatever it was that I was doing. And the people who managed this program saw that. And so I had built something, it worked out well, it was geared towards this individual vendor. And so they just started asking me to help with more tasks and more tasks and more tasks as well too. And then at some point, I became the exclusive person that just helped them with the state with that. And it came from setting up corporations for people. And I had to sit with CPAs, and I had to sit with very educated people and learn all this stuff. This is what you do for this. This is what you do for this. Like, I know that blind people don't aren't required to file digital forms. So if you're visually impaired, you can always still mail your tax forms in. And they'll still take them. You get all these other little small perks along the way as well too. And I'm an information whore. And so I
Yeah.
was taking it all in, and I was learning everything that I could, and I was just getting as much as I could. And I was seeing this growth where I learned all these skills and was able to help these other people. And then it kind of just snowballed from there. And before I knew it, I was driving 4 or 5 hours to help with a restaurant over in this other place. I was driving up near Canada and doing this. And I was going to all these different places. Like, I think one of the coolest places I ever got to go to is I went to Bangor, which is a nuclear submarine base. And one
What?
guy has a cafe. Yeah, one guy has a cafe at the nuclear submarine base, and like, when you go to a nuclear submarine base, you drive up to this one area, and it's where you have to go and check in. And so your vendor has to submit paperwork about you. You have to go through. You have to fill all this stuff out, and this is the army that you're doing this with. This isn't like a federal agency or anything like that, too. And you go and you sit in this room with like 60 people, and you sit there for like 4.5 hours, 5 hours, and you just sit there and you wait for them. They come, they fingerprint you, they ask you questions about, and they do this whole thing, and then they give you this badge, and this badge they give you, so it's very easily color coded. So it's meant to
Okay.
say you shouldn't be in this area just based off of easily visually looking at you. And so you're just walking along, and I don't know if you've ever seen a submarine in person, but when I was
No,
seeing them
no.
built, my first impression was these are way bigger than, like, when you see something on a TV screen. You got to think like 150 people live on this for X amount of
Yeah.
time. Like, they're they're big. And I remember sitting there seeing it, and it's like looking up, you're like looking around in it, and then across this way, it's all of a sudden it's like a lockdown warehouse or something. And I have this green, if I believe my badge is green, but to go into those areas, you have to have these red badges. And when you go through this interview process, they make you watch these videos on the clearance stuff. And they'll just take you and put you in like a holding cell. And this is the army, an army law. And this is not, they make it very clear that you are not in a part of the like Washington state right now. You are in a part, you are on federal land. And so it's like, you're sitting there and I'm going through this place and I'm only there to like tell the guy, it's like, put the Skittles here and order this, like this chip, and I'm only there. I think it was like make a recipe card, like make soups for him and stuff. And it's like there's like legit nuclear subs being built next to me, and so the job took me to all these places, and it was really cool with that as well too.